From the very beginning we see an exciting scene in which a young girl, with fiery hair and looking like an elf, casts a spell. She is the one who commands the water and asks the Lord of Spirits to answer her call. She stands upright, concentrating on the words of the spell. The blue rays of magic flowed into a light-colored ball, illuminating the space around her like a small sun. Her delicate face expressed a mixture of anticipation and excitement. There was visible worry in her eyes. She stood silent and just watched the scene. The rays of magic finally converged at one point, and suddenly a bright flash illuminated the area with its radiance. Thanks to the surge of this energy, we see our heroine in the middle of a dark forest with a clear blue lake. A pillar of water, surrounded by a magical aura, began to rise from the lake as if coming to life. With interest the girl, with her pink, like the coloring of a flamingo bird, eyes, watched what was going on. She could not look away. She watched as the pillar of water began to take on the features of a human face. Suddenly, a man with long blue hair and snow-white skin appeared in front of her, as if he had completed his transformation. His hair, like streams of blue flame, fell over his shoulders. The girl was stunned by his beauty, so much so that she stared at him with her mouth open, not noticing anything else. A man in a long white dress-like garment and skin like moonlight stood before her. He wanted to know who had summoned him. Judy, so our heroine introduced herself to the Spirit Lord, answering that she had summoned him. Suddenly Judy felt dizzy. Exhausted, she fell right into the arms of the Spirit Lord. He certainly wasn't happy about it. From that moment on, Judy's life became like a fairy tale. She made a contract with that Spirit Lord and now they live together as if they were ordinary people. His name is Elaine, by the way. They spent their time together, learning magic and reaching new heights. While Judy rejoiced at her victory over the wild beast, Elaine grumbled like an old man. "You shouldn't rejoice so much," he said. "Or she should try harder next time," although Judy caught this fish in a pretty interesting way. But despite Elaine's nagging, he cared for and protected her. He considered Judy a weak half-elf and for that reason he had to look after her. Elaine became her support and backbone. And here the great Spirit Lord is helping his adorable Judy, make soup. And yet, they were a beautiful couple and perfect for each other. Whether it was a real relationship or just the fulfillment of a contract, there was only one thing you could say when you looked at the two of them: love. Judy lowered her gaze. She wanted to tell Elaine what she had been thinking about for a long time. She asked for her true wish to be granted. Elaine was puzzled. He smiled and asked Judy to simply tell him what she wished for. Judy wanted Elaine to share some of his mana with her. She brought her hands together and asked him like a child asks its parent. Elaine wanted to know how much mana she needed. After all, with his aura she could become an 8th grade mage. Apparently that would be a good achievement for Judy. She only asked for 1/10 of his mana. Elaine raises his hand and a blue orb appears above his palm, enveloped in blue streams of his magic. Judy had asked for the power herself, but she was still worried that something bad would happen if Elaine gave it to her. She was a little confused, her thoughts making Judy doubt her wish. Elaine knew that all would not be well after he gave up some of his power, but it didn't matter to him. He wanted to help Judy, to make her stronger and better, and the rest didn't matter. Judy touched Elaine, a smile on her face. Judy was overjoyed and thanked Elaine profusely. As Elaine transferred his power to her, something strange happened. We see Elaine's mana, with Judy's hands reaching for it on one side and a hand with a red flame forming over it on the other. The space around the girl took on dark purple colors, as if she had entered another dimension. In front of Judy stood a man in a black cloak with a red hood. Over his palm was an energy similar to the one Elaine had given her. Only this mysterious stranger's energy was red like fire and blood. The stranger called that blob of energy the child of Judy's blood and Elaine's mana and, pointing his hand at the girl, placed it in Judy's belly. He warned Judy that she must carry it herself. Suddenly the man began to disappear. He had promised to visit Judy in 10 months. A beam of violet light appeared behind him, a mist enveloped the space around him, and the stranger disappeared. We are transported to Judy and Elaine's house. Their house stood in a small clearing in the middle of the forest and was surrounded by a magical barrier. Something started hitting the barrier. Apparently someone really wanted to get into the house. The attacks worked and the barrier was completely dissipated. The house was left without external defenses. But despite what was happening outside, Judy stood unperturbed, all her attention focused on the unborn child. There was a splash behind Judy's back, but she was still as calm. It was Elaine who had dispelled the barrier around the house. The barrier was a surprise to him, and Elaine wanted to know the reason for Judy's behavior. His face expressed anger and irritation. He didn't understand why Judy wanted to hide from him. Enraged, Elaine voiced his suspicions. Judy had made a contract with a demon? But why had she done it? But Judy still continued to stand with her back to him, as if ignoring him. Maybe she just didn't want to talk to him. This infuriated Elaine, his face reddening with anger. He demanded an explanation from Judy. Suddenly Judy turns and answers in the affirmative. Elaine was right after all, she had indeed made a contract with the demon. Judy with a calm expression, without guilt, regret or anger once again confirmed Elaine's words. Elaine continued to question her angrily. He needed to know why Judy had done such a thing. Why she would do such a thing, since he had already given her his powers. With imperturbable calmness Judy said words that a man would hardly want to hear from a woman. She decided that Elaine didn't need to know about this and had nothing to worry about. Elaine didn't understand how she could do this to him. He remained filled with anger, as if he had been betrayed and his trust trampled. He stopped this pointless dialogue by lowering his gaze. Just a few seconds later, Elaine was gone. He left the house in a depressed state. Judy continued to stand in the same place, still unfazed. She thought she had done the right thing, or there was no other way to explain the calmness on her face. Judy did not blame Elaine for her outburst of emotion, for Elaine did not know the whole truth. She only sighed quietly. Outside the window of their house, the sun was setting and the leaves were falling. Time passed, summer was replaced by fall, and hers by winter. On a frosty winter day, Judy was sitting at a table by the window, holding a piece of paper and a pen. She was warmly dressed, steam coming out of her mouth, because the house was cold. For the first time Judy wrote a letter to her unborn child. It seemed like an ordinary letter, but for her it was something difficult. Judy wanted to hear the word mommy from her child as soon as possible. She was ready to give everything to make that moment come sooner. But Judy was so happy to realize that she had this child. Judy goes on to write words that would make not only a child but an adult empty a tear. She leaves immediately after the baby is born, without explaining why she is doing so, but Judy promises to watch over the baby and Elaine from heaven. Meanwhile, Elaine sat in a place far from his beloved, being sad and depressed. A girl in a white dress and red hair, unfamiliar to us, was watching him. She thought Elaine was pathetic and should go to Judy if he wanted to see her, but Elaine was stubborn. The girl understood that he was the way he was, but she sincerely hoped that Elaine would not regret his decision. Judy continued to write her letter. She asked her child not to resent her father, no matter what emotions Elaine showed toward him. Judy was sure that the father would love his child sincerely. She didn't know if she would be able to see her baby, but his movements in her belly made Judy really happy. She finished her letter and put it in the envelope. Putting the letter on the table, Judy hoped her daughter would be happy even if her mother wasn't around. Judy loved her very much, even though she had never seen her. She barely had time to put the letter on the table before the very same demon appeared behind her back. Above his back, his dark aura that looked like black flames manifested. With a sly smile, he said it was payback time. Judy admitted that she really wished she could stay with her family, she was sorry to leave them behind. But her face remained calm, she was not afraid of her fate, but had accepted it during her very first encounter with the demon. The last time Judy confessed her love for Elaine, leaving him with a child. Suddenly Elaine appears, he wanted to save his beloved, but it was too late. Judy was unconscious in the demon's arms. Elaine tried to use his magic. He wanted with all his heart to save Judy. A burst of Elaine's water magic erupts. But the demon manages to escape, taking Judy with him and pointing out Elaine's tardiness with a sense of superiority. Elaine stands motionless, a look of incomprehension on his face. Water dripped at his feet. It was the remnants of the magic he'd used to try to stop the demon. Elaine wondered what had just happened. His face shifted with emotion. Though he was a spirit, he still treasured the man closest to him. He raises his hands. A tremor could be seen in Elaine's hands, it was as if he was about to cry. Clutching his face, he shouted his beloved's name loudly. Emotions overwhelmed him, he couldn't hold back any longer. He was standing near where Judy had just been, the very letter lay on the table, and a strange sound was heard from outside. It was a baby crying. His daughter was crying as she lay in the chair. This little girl looked a lot like her father. Her hair, eyebrows, and eyelids were as blue as her father's. Elaine noticed his daughter. He saw her for the first time in his life, but was he happy about it? The father lowered his arms, clearly intending to do something. He probably wants to pick up his little girl and hug her. And then there's a wave. The water begins to envelop the chair where the infant wished to be. What? Elaine decides to blame her daughter for what happened. She's just a baby after all, how could it be? The water continues to envelop the crying child. I hope Elaine realizes the consequences of such actions. After all, he's already been burned once. The child disappears from the chair he was in. In an instant we are transported from a cozy cabin in the woods, to a beach with crystal clear and bright blue water. The waves were crashing against the shore. Elaine and Judy's young daughter finds herself on this lovely beach. She was brought here by her father and left alone. Strangely, she was no longer crying, but shivering asleep on the sand. The sea waves rolled a little on her fragile little body. She was cold and scared alone without her mother and father, no one took her in his arms, hugged her, warmed her and rocked her. That was her birthday and the first minutes of her life in this world. This is a picture of two beautiful black-haired babies. One sucking on a pacifier, the other drinking milk. It doesn't look ordinary, but is this the world we've just been in? Another photo, it shows older kids, but it looks like the same little ones. And here they are with their parents. It looks like a happy and ordinary family. How cute, they're building a snowman. You can see that the father is pleased, but not wholeheartedly, heh. On the beach? It reminds me of the same beach where they left a tiny little girl. Oh, that must be one of those kids in the photo. Looks like she decided to reminisce about her childhood and was looking through the family album. As it turned out, she was the abandoned girl. Elaine made another mistake and lost absolutely everything he had. Those people in the photo saved the little girl and raised her as their daughter. The girl was very grateful to them, and she grew up together with her brother Haman. She heard someone come to the door. "Is she ready?" asked the person standing outside the door. And the girl answered that she was on her way out, closing the photo album. The door began to open. Her brother Haman, a handsome dark-haired boy, entered the room. Smiling, he asked why his sister was taking her time. Oh, she was furious that her brother had entered without knocking. "Are you sick of living?" the girl shouted. Haman barely had time to get out of her room. Their mother was standing outside the room, turning to the daughter. "We learn her name. The girl's name is Hayin. Mom asked if her daughter had packed. Heian explained to her mom why she was late, and they smiled together and went to Heian. As Heian leaves the room, we can examine the family photo on the wall. It looks like the children grew up in a police officer's family, and judging by the medal on his chest, he was good at his job. While Heian went to the pool with her family, let's find out what her real father Elaim is up to. Looks like he decided to visit their old house in the middle of the woods, and did so for the first time in 17 years. As he approached the table, his attention was drawn to the very letter Judy had written for Heian. A letter? Elaim asked in surprise. It was the first time he had seen it. Elaim took the letter out of the envelope and began to read. He read very carefully, absorbing every word. Elaim was somehow very surprised and confused to learn that Judy had left the child to him. A very strange reaction on his part. Suddenly Elaim raised his palm and began to conjure. His gaze was very determined, but his expression was grim, as if he had never smiled once in all those 17 years. His water magic was turning into a whirlpool. Thankful for this ability, he could watch his daughter, and it seemed to be the first time he had seen her since he had left her on the beach. He didn't say a word, just stood there silently staring at the only thing that reminded him of Judy in any way. Despite her beautiful smile and cheerful mood, Elaim referred to his daughter only as his aura. Interrupted from his observation, Elaim began to increase the size of the vortex. The funnel was getting bigger and bigger. After 17 years, he decided to fulfill his lover's last wish. Heian was puzzled, she didn't understand what was happening. The girl was swimming calmly when suddenly something strange began to happen. She saw before her the vortex her father had created. Of course, she didn't know that yet and couldn't know it. Heian thought someone had pulled a cork from the bottom of the pool, but the other visitors didn't notice anything and went on about their business. A strong stream of water began to pull the girl into this vortex. She didn't have time to realize or understand anything. The whirlpool grew larger and larger as it continued to engulf Heian. She was startled, completely unaware of what was happening. Heian called out for help to her brother and mom, but no one heard her. They were very close to her. The girl was submerged under the water, not understanding why no one could hear her. Her body was almost completely swallowed by the water. Heian breathed in as much air as she could, her body completely underwater. She couldn't breathe, her strength was running out, the air had stopped flowing into her lungs. Heian's hair was colored bright blue, as it had been on the first day of her life. And her breasts became, smaller several times over. Heian went deeper and deeper under the water. It seemed that it was not a pool but an ocean with no bottom. And at that moment, the girl lost consciousness. No longer could she fight or hope to escape. Suddenly Heian finds herself on the bed, still unconscious, as if in a water cocoon. The water evaporated and the girl could breathe again, but she didn't come to her senses. Her biological father stood over her. Heian's appearance changed, every hair on her head became blue in color, her face seemed to have lost weight. She was completely different from her former self. Elaim still stood beside her without averting his gaze. But there was no positive emotion on his face, no paternal love for his child. As it turned out, the father of the year Elaim didn't even know the sex of his child, thinking it was a boy. Elaim didn't really want to wait for Heian to wake up. In a cold and stern voice, he said that the child should consider it an honor to be cared for by the elemental king himself. Elaim left again. After a little while, Heian woke up. Her body was in pain. Of course, such a transformation would hardly make her feel comfortable, so to speak. Heian heard voices around her, those were saying that she was finally awake. The girl didn't understand what was happening, she looked around. They were two small creatures with wings, looking like fairies. They did not emit an ounce of hostility at all. Heian was a little scared, it was the first time she had seen these creatures and mistook them for ghosts. Heian hid under the blanket. They were called elemental spirits. The blue spirit's name was Undine, and she was the spirit of water. The green one, the wind spirit, introduced herself as Sylph. Heian didn't say anything back to them, she was still scared. Heian thought she was seeing ghosts because she had almost drowned. Pondering, she continued to consider these spirits. Distracted from her thoughts, Heian looked around. Where am I? I didn't realize where I was. Looking around, all she saw was a place unfamiliar to her with creatures not of her world. She was looking for her mom. Fear slightly gone, Heian directed her gaze to the spirits flying around the room. The spirits flew from side to side, paying no attention to Heian. It was creepy for Heian to talk to ghosts, but she had no other choice. She began to ask the spirits if they had seen anyone else in the area. But the spirits saw no one but her. She was the only person in the place. The last thing Heian remembered was being sucked into a whirlpool while swimming. She wondered who had brought her to this place. It still seemed to her that she had died. But Heian refused to believe it. She got up from the bed, wobbling from side to side. It was hard to stand on her feet. Heian had to look around and see what this strange place was. The weakness in her body was too much. Her legs didn't want to obey. Heian went to the door at the end of the room and opened it. In front of her she saw a dark room with a couch, a table, a chair, and a rug on the floor. Continuing to look around the place, Heian saw the kitchen, then the front door. Everything looked like an ordinary house. All the windows in the house were boarded up. Was it an abandoned house or was someone deliberately keeping her in? It all seemed strange to the girl. Her hand reached for the front door handle. Heian was about to leave the house. Heian's face was very agitated, sweat beading on her delicate skin. The door opened, the light blinding her eyes. What was Heian sure of? She opened her eyes, they seemed to be getting used to the light after the pitch black and eerie darkness. Suddenly, excitement was replaced by surprise. What did she see in front of her? Heian saw the seabed. This house stood on the seabed, with sea creatures swimming around it, and trees without leaves standing on the property. Different emotions could be seen on Heian's face. Shock, surprise, incomprehension. Her brain didn't realize what was happening. Heian turned pale, it looked like she was about to faint once more. Bam! There was the sound of impact from the fall. Heian was lying on the floor. A man in a long white robe approached her. As expected, it was her daddy Elaine. He lifted Heian with his magic power, which enveloped the girl's entire body. Elaine continued to think it was a boy. He thought the child was too weak as the possessor of his aura. He gently places Heian's unconscious body on the bed. Elaine stood beside the bed, wondering why his child was so weak. Was it because he was in a world where the elements were weak? Heian began to come to her senses. Slowly, she woke up, her head throbbing. Heian realized that she had lost consciousness again. Again she found herself in that strange room. Heian still didn't understand what was happening. There was no longer any fear left on her face. She didn't seem to care anymore. She heard Elaine's voice calling her, dumbass. Heian flinched in surprise. When Heian turned around and saw the man in the room, her soul was filled with joy. Elaine stood in the corner, his face expressing displeasure and contempt. Heian looked at him the same way Judy had looked at him the first time they met. She didn't know who this man was yet, but all of Heian's attention was on Elaine. She was dazzled by the beauty of this tall, blue-haired young man. Elaine grudgingly asked what the guy was staring at. He still didn't understand anything. Heian smiled and apologized for being so rude, but in her mind she already knew how disgusted he was with her. She had to understand what had happened, and this blue-haired brute was the only one who could explain it. With a haughty look Elaine tried to hurt Heian just a little. She had no choice but to bear it. Through her frustration, she asked where they were. Elaine stood idly by, his face unchanged, being displeased. He looked like he was going to answer her questions. The map we see gives us some insight into the world Heian is on. It certainly wasn't Earth. The map shows a continent surrounded by water and littered with many cities. The place where our heroes were was called the Karjalan Sea. It was the first time Heian had heard of it. She tried to figure out where on earth this sea was. She was more concerned with why they were at the bottom of this sea and about that she asked her interlocutor. The answer startled Heian. This man had brought her here. Heian was shocked. Was he really able to bring this house to the bottom of the sea with her? Elaine looked at her calmly. He explained that not only had he brought her, but he had put a barrier around the house, for safety. Heian started asking even more questions. She wanted to know who this strange man was and what was going on. Elaine listened to her in silence. He called himself the king of the water elemental without saying a word about their kinship. Heian was seized with even more shock and surprise. The king of water? How could that even be? She thought Elaine was just like those little spirits that looked like fairies. To her, he was a kind of ghost. There was no room in Heian's understanding for such beings. This was the first time she had encountered them. She could be understood. Elaine smiled proudly and smugly, indicating that Heian hadn't even dreamed of meeting such an important person. But that wasn't what the girl was thinking about. Heian began to cry and gasp, her mind unable to think straight. Elaine began to get annoyed with Heian's behavior. He asked why she started crying. Heian started sobbing so hard that she even embarrassed Elaine. No wonder she's crying. After all, Heian had decided that she had died. It was because of her death that she herself became a ghost and saw all these creatures. Her hysterics were interrupted by a sudden knock. Heian looked up. She saw Elaine's facial expression change dramatically. He emitted a dark aura, and water appeared in the palm of his hand. Something strange was happening. Heian couldn't move. Elaine pointed his palm at her with the spell ready. He decided to warn her, but about what? A sudden blow to the living threw Heian backwards. The poor girl fell to her knees, clutching the area of impact and began coughing violently. She couldn't breathe, tears rolling from her eyes. Elaine's palm was still emitting magic. His water magic was more like tongues of blue flame than water. Elaine was furious at the comparison. Heian had hurt his ego by comparing him to a ghost, and he had promised to kill her if she ever mistook him for a ghost again. Although Heian herself knew nothing about elemental spirits. Yeah, Daddy was pretty pissed off, but he quickly calmed down. Heian sat down on the bed. She could hardly breathe. Trembling she asked, "What do the elements mean?" Elaine was surprised for some reason. He wondered if Heian didn't know about elemental spirits. She couldn't know about them, for the world Heian lived in was different from this one. And Elaine finally remembered it. He said that in his world, everyone knows about elemental spirits. Moreover, some people can make contracts with them and use the spirits' abilities. Elaine used his magic again, but only to show her the memories. The girl was originally born into this world. Elaine seems to want to tell her the truth. He showed her how he had sent her to another world when Heian was still very young. He was silent for a moment. Finished showing her the memories, Elaine squeezed her hand, saying that he was the one who brought Heian back to her homeworld. Emotions overwhelmed Heian. "Was I born in this world?" she asked the spirit. Her face reddened with anger. She took Elaine's story for a lie, for she knew her mother had abandoned Heian on the beach right after she was born. These words infuriated Elaine and he demanded that she stop insulting her mom. Heian was frightened by such yelling. Heian seemed to start believing Elaine's words, she thought. There were more and more questions in her mind. She asked if Elaine knew her mom. Elaine covered his face with his hand as if about to cry. Turning his face away, he only quietly said that Heian's mom had died. Heian leaned in. She didn't expect to hear something like that. She wanted to know why her mother had abandoned her. She didn't know the most important thing yet, and Elaine began to tell her. A strange smile appeared on his face, as if he wanted Heian to know everything as soon as possible. Her mother had never left her or even seen her daughter's face. She would have given anything for such a child, but she died before she could see her. These were the words Elaine said to his daughter. The emotion on Heian's face cannot be described in words. Elaine couldn't accept the fact that the girl was living because of her mother's sacrifice, so he sent her away from him. It wasn't the mother who abandoned Heian, it was him. He admitted guilt and said that Heian had only him to blame. Heian was filled with anger. Who gave him that right? She shouted it in Elaine's face. Abruptly Elaine grabbed Heian by the shirt and pulled her closer to him. Elaine told her straight to her face that he never wanted her around him. He only wanted Judy. Elaine let go of Heian and she fell to the floor. He was about to tell her. Heian sits on the floor with her mouth open and listens silently. Elaine admits that he is her birth father. The girl sat in shock with her eyes wide open with surprise. She doesn't seem to believe her old man. As expected, she didn't believe it and demanded proof. Elaine tells her to follow him. He's going to show her his own reflection. They both leave the room. It was still very dark inside the house. Heian could not see anything. Elaine, with a disgruntled face, lit a bright yellow light. That light flew across the room. Heian stared at it like a child seeing something new for the first time. Heian went to the mirror. She didn't notice anything and said that she looked as usual. She couldn't figure out what evidence Elaine had until she looked closer. It finally came to her. She cried out in surprise, unable to realize what was wrong with her hair. Heian plucked out a wisp of hair and scrutinized it with interest and bewilderment. Elaine interrupts his daughter from this important activity and asks her to sit across from him. Heian sat down in the chair and Elaine told her that she possessed the same aura as him. Though she couldn't realize it yet. Thanks to his aura, Heian could interact with spirits unlike the rest of the inhabitants of this world. Normally, no one could possess Elaine's aura unless they had a contract with him. Let's take a look at these spirits. Elaine is a water spirit. The one on the right appears to be an earth spirit. On the left is the spirit of wind, and on top is the spirit of fire. The four elementals of this world. Elaine tells us that elementals cannot have offspring. But what does that mean? Heian stood up abruptly, slapping her hands on the table, interrupting Elaine's story. She decided that if elementals couldn't have offspring, then Elaine couldn't be her father either. Elaine continued to speak. He explained that elementals don't have children because they have no reproductive system. They simply begin to exist, and when they die, they disappear. Elaine said that this was her home now and she should stay in the new world. Heian was very angry at those words. She jumped up again and slapped her hands on the table. She was worried that her parents from the previous world were worried about her and wanted to go back. And then Elaine decided to calm her down in a very original way. He said that Heian was simply forgotten in her world. Heian belongs to this world. Judging from the scenery, this world was about 200 years behind Earth, but it was full of wonders not found on Earth. Heian was numb. She dropped her hands and stood with her mouth wide open. Elaine went on to say that she was already forgotten, and any record or reminder of her was gone. Angry, Heian kept saying that it was a lie. She didn't want to believe her captor's words. Elaine was definitely not in agreement with what she said. He thought he had gotten his son back and was not the kidnapper. Heian became very agitated, shifting her attention from the kidnapping to Elaine calling her son. "I'm a woman," she screamed. But putting her hand on her chest, she noticed something. Something was wrong. She ran her hands over her breasts and realized she was gone. Awkward situation. She had a very bad feeling. Heian told Elaine to wait, and went off to another room herself, closing the door loudly behind him. Elaine didn't understand the reason for this behavior, but seemed to experience embarrassment. Heian stood outside the door and wanted to find out something. It was like she didn't want to do it, mentally preparing for the worst. Heian pulled back her pants and looked over there. But soon she exhaled a sigh of relief. There was nothing dangling. Heian was so happy that she thanked God that she was still a woman. Without a single knock, Elaine entered the room. She told him to wait outside, but he disobeyed. Heian told him that she was not a man. Heian confirmed Elaine's hunch. He thought that since she was descended from a half-elf, she would have a gender. Heian was a unique creature that would not appear again, and Elaine didn't know what to expect from his daughter. Although Heian herself only cared about her gender. Elaine seemed to have pranked Heian. Since she wasn't currently a woman, he could call her a man. The girl was furious at those words. Again Heian began to scream, claiming that she was not a man or his son. Elaine interrupted her, ordering her to be silent. If he chose to call her son, then so be it. Heian didn't accept it. In her mind she called her father a damned old man. Heian was seething with anger. She decides to run away, no matter what it takes. Some time passed. Heian was sleeping sweetly in that very room. Elaine decided to wake her up, but Heian wanted to sleep for another 5 minutes. Suddenly she was underwater, a couple dozen meters from the house she had just been in. Heian tries to inhale, but realizes he is underwater. Had the old man lost his mind? These thoughts were running around in her head. First he called Heian his son, and now he's trying to kill him. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. Her lungs were pierced with pain. She can't breathe, there was only one option left. She needs to get back to the house, it was the only way she could save herself. The distance to the house was too far, she can't make it. Mentally, Heian started to ask for help, losing consciousness in the process. Is this the end? But at the last moment, Elaine shows up. He covers Heian's mouth with his palm, as if giving her a chance to breathe. Did you really want to kill yourself? Heian's father asked, clearly joking with her. As you can imagine, no words of gratitude were heard from Elaine. With this prank, Elaine wanted to awaken his daughter's latent abilities. They seemed to be awakened only in certain stressful situations. Heian's displeasure was unimaginable. Since she was kidnapped, let her live her life in peace. That's what she thought. Elaine couldn't believe that his daughter didn't know how to use her energy. Meanwhile, Heian was reminiscing about her family. She missed them a lot. Something is starting to happen. Is her father casting his spells again? Heian's body was enveloped by a blue aura, she was surprised. Elaine removed his hand, but Heian could breathe without any trouble. She had managed to awaken some of her power. This was followed by praise from her father. Heian was not happy because her father called her an idiot. How could that old fart name his daughter like that? Heian thought to herself. Elaine asked who she called old, you know. Only how did he understand it if Heian only thought so? Can he read minds? Heian is again shocked at what's happening. Spirits don't have vocal cords, they used will to communicate. Heian demanded that she stop getting in her head, for she had insulted her father in this way more than once. Elaine, in turn, suggested that she not put her will into her thoughts. Another awkward situation. Heian was already in agreement with everything her father said, just to get back to the house faster. But no such luck, Elaine told her to find her own way. Well, how is she supposed to take it? Elaine advised using the power of the spirits and simply dissolved in the water, wishing them good luck. Following Heian managed to give her father her opinion of him. It seems like some time had already passed. Heian sat at the bottom of the sea and sighed heavily. It was too much for her, all this training was really wearing her out. Elaine appeared out of nowhere. Like a true teacher, he was giving her instructions. She didn't have to breathe like a human, her body was already taking mana from the water. Heian was tired of her father throwing her into the sea every day and showing up whenever he pleased. Not very politely, but Elaine explained to his daughter why this was the case. She still didn't know how to use her energy. Heian was not very pleased with his admonition. She was already shaking at Elaine's words. Of course, Heian had to go home on her own again. Someone suddenly interferes in their conversation, stating that he will stay with Heian. Judging by his paw, it wasn't a human. It was a huge spirit in the shape of a dog, with a large crystal in the middle of his forehead. His name was Indaren, and Heian was very happy to see him. She rushed to hug the doggy, asking where he had been for so long. Indaren was a very nice, first-class spirit who helped Heian. Also, he could disobey her old man. Thanks to Indaren, Heian didn't need her father as much. And Elaine didn't like it very much. He became uncomfortable in their company, so he just disappeared. Well, this is nothing new in Elaine's behavior. Indaren looked at Heian and asked if he would like to go home at once. He also addressed Heian in the masculine gender, but she didn't mind. Heian thought for a bit and decided to take a walk before they came back. Together they went for a walk on the vast expanse of the Karjalan Sea. Sitting on the back of her faithful assistant, Heian noticed something. It was a shipwreck. Together they came closer and closer to it. This wooden sailing ship was simply enormous. It made the Heian and Indaren seem tiny. Heian decided that there would definitely be treasure inside the ship. Indaren realized what they had come here for. What's with the stereotypes about shipwrecks? She really wanted to check what was aboard the ship. A smirk appeared on her face. She had an escape plan in her head that she had thought of a long time ago, but she needed money to do it. The true reason they had visited this place. Hearing the command, Indaren obediently moved forward. He had been here once before and knew where the breach was. Indaren had investigated this place, since it was not far from here, and it was his territory. That's how he explained it to Heian. Stepping inside, Heian was impressed. She thought it was a cargo ship, but it turned out to be a luxury cruise ship. Heian felt her luck. At this moment she became like a naive child. She imagined herself on top of a mountain of gold, for such an expensive ship certainly had it. Enthusiastically, raising their hands above their heads, they moved off in search of riches. Heian looked around one room, there was nothing but scattered expensive furniture. Then another room. And it was empty. They continued down the long corridor. It was clear from the arrangement of the lights that there was a ceiling beneath their feet. The next room turned out to be like all the previous ones, no hint of riches. Heian closes the door. She was a little disappointed, there was nothing of value on the ship. At least there were no bodies. Heian decided to look on the other deck. Exploring the ship, she saw a ladder somewhere. Ah, there she is. On the upper deck, she saw a more luxurious interior and a bunch of miscellaneous junk. Perhaps the previous rooms were economy class. That's what she suggested to Indaren. Heian walked closer to the furniture and decided to check it out. She rummaged through this pile of once lavish and expensive furniture, so far to no avail. Suddenly she noticed something. It was a thin gold bracelet. Her first valuable find on this ship. Heian found expensive clothes with jewelry that she just took off. She delighted in the findings like a small child delighted in a new toy. Indaren noticed such childlike joy. Satisfied, Heian looks into the closet. She couldn't wait to see what was inside. But what did she see there? It was like a garment. Heian continued to consider. Suddenly, she was overcome with shock. In front of Heian's face was something that looked like a human body. The girl was really scared. Isn't that surprising? A body aboard a shipwreck. Is it really a corpse? Heian cried out. She was trembling all over. The horror of what she saw was evident in her eyes. Indaren turned to speak to his mistress, but Heian did not answer. Suddenly those little spirits appeared. They didn't understand what had happened either. I mean, she must have liked it. But what did they talk about? These little pranksters were using this unfortunate body for some sort of amusement. One of the spirits waved the drowned man's hand at Heian, trying to say hello. Heian started to faint from fear and shock. But a bright blue aura began to appear around her. Clutching her head, she just wanted this body to disappear. The aura or energy around her began to form a vortex. This whirlpool headed towards the body, hitting it. Heian opened her ears and saw. There was a huge hole in the hull of the ship, the size of a man. The place where the body had been was empty. Heian tried to understand what had happened. Was she able to awaken her spiritual power? Until that moment, she couldn't even control a mug of water. And then it hit her. Now she understood what it meant to use the power of her body. It's like making my legs walk. Heian has gotten better again. She rejoiced like a little child. She was smiling ear to ear. Heian could use her power, she continued to cheer. Indaren sat next to her and smiled sweetly as he looked at her. Suddenly Indaren looked to his left, something began to appear near him. It was Elaime. It looked like he was watching them. Indaren was surprised by his host's presence. Elaime looked at his daughter. She's making a fuss over such a trifle, he said. Though he smiled faintly himself. Heian had gotten better, Indaren told him. It was obvious to Elaime. After all, we were talking about the child of the elemental king himself. Elaime seemed pleased with her progress anyway. Elaime walked over to Heian and started talking to her about the power. Did she understand how to use it? The girl turned around in surprise. Yes, replied Heian, while in her thoughts she wondered how he ended up here. She was grateful to that little Undine spirit. Without her help she wouldn't have figured out how to unlock her abilities. Heian smiled sweetly as she continued to think about what had happened. Elaime decided to remind himself. What are you grinning about? Elaime asked. Heian turned around. It seemed to her that Elaime would yell at her for being scared of that body. Heian interrupted the flow of her thoughts, for her father had no trouble reading them. Elaime notices that Heian's mood has changed. Why are you so glum? Speak up if you have something to say. Elaime said. It seemed to Heian that her father would no longer get in her head. Didn't you hear what I was saying? She asked Elaime. In her thoughts, she called her father a crazy old fart while wondering if Elaime could hear her words in her head. Elaime realized that Heian had learned how to use telepathic communication. He called her so impressionable. Heian wanted Daddy to be happy for her for once. She even yelled at him a little. After the walk, Heian came home. She was sitting on a stool outside the house holding a frying pan. The creature beside her resembled a fire spirit. It looked like a chicken. Just as Heian decided to tell us about it. This little girl's name is Casa, a low-ranking spirit who helped with the cooking. Heian just had to put a pan of fish on it and voila, done. But Heian yawned. She was bored. Her life had become a routine. All she did was eat, sleep and train. Boring as hell. She has no one to talk to but the spirits. Her only entertainment is treasure hunting. She pulled out the bag of jewelry she'd managed to find. Heian was looking at one of the gold coins, and it made her think about the lives of people in this world. She tried to recognize the letters that were engraved on the coin. Heian wondered what she would look like in one of the local dresses. What kind of fish is eaten in this world, raw or fried? Do they cook with magic? Do they have cars or carriages? Are their streets planted with trees and flowers? Or maybe they can teleport using magical portals. Heian pondered this with interest. Would she be able to escape during practice, since no one was following her? That's what she thought. However, it was too early to escape, she didn't even understand the language. She didn't like working out, but it was better than going to college. Heian looked at her bag of valuables again. Could she sell the jewelry she had? Or just leave them at home? Her thoughts were suddenly dispelled. She saw smoke. Heian started screaming. Nothing serious happened, just her lunch burned. She only asked why Casa hadn't warned her. Well, Heian will have to cook the clams again. She definitely won't mess them up this time. Elaine came out of nowhere again. You eat the same thing, you have no culinary skills? Elaine said. Heian made excuses that she never cooked for herself and that she had a lot of other things to do. Elaine handed Heian her mother's cookbook. Heian opened it and began leafing through it. She didn't understand the language in which the book was written. How was she supposed to read it? Elaine only sighed heavily, he would have to teach her that too. Heian herself didn't understand why she could speak to any spirits, but she couldn't read a word. It turns out that the spirits could understand each other without a problem. Elaine decided that Judy had anticipated such an option. He handed Heian a paper scroll. What is it? Heian asked with interest. What do you think? It's a scroll. Elaine answered her. She unfolded it, seeing the strange runes inside the circle. This scroll contained a spell that would make Heian a polyglot. She was very surprised, but Elaine said to break it up soon. Heian tears the scroll and streams of magic begin to envelop the girl. A magic seal was glowing above her. Heian watched with interest. In the blink of an eye, all the magic was gone. Did it really work? Now she had to understand what was written in the book. Indeed, as she opened the book, she understood every word in it. I think it worked, said Elaine. He continued to tell Heian something, but she didn't listen to him. She only admired the appetizing pictures in the book. Heian decided to make fried fish for dinner. Elaine and Heian were in the room. She sat at the table while Elaine was about to demonstrate something. He begins to create a spell. The clot of water took on the shape of a bird that flew across the room. Heian only stared in surprise, with her mouth wide open, she marveled at such a trick. And now it was her turn. She didn't mind giving it a try. Heian brought her hands closer together and a watery clot formed between them. She tried to shape it, but it didn't turn out so well. Trying to ask her father a question, he told her to stay focused so as not to mess up the shape of the clot. It has to become more refined for it to work. That's what Elaine said. Heian tries to betray the shape of his magic again. Is that a slime? Father asks. Isn't that a butterfly? Angrily replies Heian. It doesn't look like a butterfly. Elaine continued to grumble, but his daughter just ignored him. We are transported to Heian's room. She was lying in bed disgruntled. She was a little upset. She hadn't asked for any of this. Her father had made her do it, and now he resented her for not being able to do it. She had learned how to create images from clots of water, but irritation was creeping through her. Heian wanted to get out of the sea. She could even read now. There was no stopping her. But there was one problem: how was she going to pull it off? She could try to swim to shore. Though Elaine would catch her faster than she could make it. Then he certainly wouldn't be happy about it. An idea popped into her head. She jumped for joy. Why hadn't she guessed before? Heian could pretend to be drowning and send a distress signal, and then, someone handsome on a beautiful sailboat would rescue her. It was the perfect plan. At least, she thought it was. The next day she went to practice alone. But Darren caught up with her. Without giving any sign, she turned around. "I already thought I'd be on my own today," she said. Darren was a little surprised. She couldn't rely on other spirits all the time. That was how Heian justified her actions. It worked. Darren asked her to return before sunset and swam back. Heian promised to fulfill his request. She waited for her mentor to leave. And was glad she'd managed to divert attention away from herself and be alone. Heian only had to find the ship. And she will be free. Heian surfaced out of the water, for the first time in a while. She saw the vast blue sea, but already on its surface. Heian decided to wait at this spot until she saw some ship. She just sat on the water and waited. She reminded her of a character from her past world. Time passed, she waited. And waited until evening came. All day, no one had ever swam past her. The sun was already setting and Heian was getting ready to go home. Suddenly a ship appeared on the horizon. She quickly plunged into the water, full of joy. Heian started screaming, wanting to be noticed. She called out for help, waving one hand out of the water. The team members seemed to notice her. Heian swam towards the ship, full of joy that she had finally managed to get away from her daddy. 2 men helped her up onto the deck. The girl began to thank them. If it wasn't for them, she would have died. One of the men said he had just done what he had to do. The man started to wonder where she was from. He wanted to help the girl find a home. Heian said her town was small and it was unlikely they'd heard of it. She just wanted to be left at the nearest port. The man began to chuckle strangely, calling her a good catch. Heian didn't realize what was happening. 2 people approached her from behind. They grabbed her arms, preventing her from moving. The girl was terrified of what was happening. What's going on? She shouldn't have trusted people like that. The mustachioed man pointed out politely. He ordered all her things to be taken away. Heian was furious. After examining her, the men realized that the girl was loaded with money. But the bag of gold was not enough for them and one of them wanted to take the ring off her finger. Heian cried out in pain as he tried to remove the ring, but he failed. Their ringleader ordered her not to spoil the valuable merchandise, leave her that ring and lead her away. Heian tried to break free, demanding to let her go. She even thought of knocking them out. But something stopped her. Heian needed a ship to take her to shore. Plus Dad could find her if he uses his power. Heian was thrown into the hold and told to sit quietly. She obeyed her captors. Okay, I'll keep my head down for now, Heian thought. There were inferior spirits flying around inside the room. They seemed to be everywhere. That place was lit up and one could see other people around Heian. They were prisoners like her. No one even looked in her direction. She wondered where this ship was going. Her only problem, though, was that she had no money. But Heian was glad for the ring left on her finger. The bandits couldn't take it down, and for good reason. A little backstory: Elaine had given Heian a ring shortly before the incident. Judy had left it to her. And also an envelope with a letter. Elaine gave it to his daughter. After reading part of the letter, Heian realized that her mother loved her a lot. Judy told her in the letter that she was passing on a magic ring that once belonged to Heian's grandmother. She was an elf. Heian decided to measure the ring by putting it on her finger. It was a little big. But suddenly, a bright blue aura began to emanate from the ring. The ring took on the size of Heian's finger and stopped coming off. Elaine explained to her that the ring holds 3 circles of mana and 1 spell. Once on, the ring wouldn't come off until it broke or the wearer died. Heian didn't understand anything, but it sounded cool to her. She decided to finish reading the letter she had already forgotten about. Mom wrote that this ring will help Heian prove who she is when she meets her grandmother. Heian learns from the letter that her mother's name was Judith Osborne and her grandmother's name was Farash. Grandma didn't have a last name since she was an elf. Her mom asked her to tell her grandmother that she had lived a happy life. Reading this moment, tears began to drip down the letter. They flowed off Heian's face, she didn't even notice it right away. Heian didn't understand why she was crying, for she had always hated her biological parents. Remembering that letter and her mother's words, Heian fell asleep. A sharp sound woke her up. The kidnappers brought dinner to the captives. Thanks to her memories, she even briefly forgot where she was. The bandits were handing out food to people. Heian was given a tray on which stood a plate of not-so-appetizing chowder, and a loaf of bread. Watery soup and a small piece of bread. She called it a pitiful sight. One of her captors told her not to be picky if she didn't want to starve to death. Poking his finger into her forehead, he warned Heian not to think or talk about running away. The girl didn't much like this manner of speaking. How will she eat without a spoon? Heian thought, looking around at the other prisoners. She also got the smallest piece of bread. She squeezed it in her hand and threw it at the back of the head of one of the kidnappers. She couldn't take it anymore, she was sick of it. This guy turned around, full of rage. He and the other 2 decided to teach Heian a lesson by kneading their fists. Heian raised her hand and pointed at them, she decides to use her power. These guys pissed her off. Heian radiated an aura around her. A swift kick. In an instant, all 3 of them were sprawled on the floor. The bald one, unlike his buddies, was still conscious, a look of horror on his face. Heian moves her fingers as if she wants to call him to her. A huge clot of water in the shape of an arm grabs the remaining bandit. Being in a desperate situation, the guy begs to be spared. Strike again. The ship snapped in half like a brittle twig. Heian rescued the captives by placing them in water cocoons, 2 Indaran-like spirits appeared around her. There was no stopping her. You should have thought before you treated her like that. The remaining crew members were swimming in the sea, they were asking for help. But everything that happened turned out to be just Heian's fantasy. If she set it all up, the old man might find her. Sighing heavily, she decided to just wait. The 2 spirits flying around the room started whispering about something. Heian asked what those 2 were talking about. They were surprised. She spoke to them, so she could see them. The spirits approached Heian and she asked if they knew where the ship was headed. But they knew nothing. One of the spirits heard the crew going to sell their captives. The 2 captives looked at Heian. She was incredibly angry. And they wondered what the reason was. Heian communicated with spirits by telepathy, so no one understood why she was acting this way. The girl was very angry that she was being sold like a thing. She soon calmed down. Heian thanked the spirits for the information. The spirits were even a little scared. All she had to do was be patient. She was going to escape as soon as the ship docked at the shore. Someone entered the room and ordered everyone up. It was the bald man in the red shirt. The captives were brought food, saying it was the last. One of the spirits saw the shore and told Heian about it. That explained their words. The captives were promised better food when they docked. Right now they just had to eat what they were given. The girl sitting next to Heian voiced her worries aloud. She wasn't in the mood to eat because she was about to be sold into slavery. Heian tried to calm the girl down and coaxed her to eat. Who knows, maybe she'll get lucky and get out of there. The girl's mood actually lifted a bit and she started to smile, calling Heian an optimist. Heian noticed as something strange began to happen to one of the captives. She heard the sound of falling dishes. Looking around, Heian saw all the captives in the room begin to fall to the floor. Suddenly, Heian's own mind went blank and she clutched her head. Their food was laced with sleeping pills, but she realized it too late. We are left to speculate about the fate of the captives, but for now let's consider other events. We see soldiers in armor and their commander. What's going on here? This man with a red cloak on his back and wearing shining armor ordered the soldiers to head to the mansion and arrest everyone there. Next to him stood a certain Viscount McAlpine, who was to surround the back of the mansion. The soldiers surrounded the gate. The appearance of the gate and the fence spoke of the high status of its owner. At the very least, he was very rich. The soldiers drew their swords and readied themselves. The commander drew his sword over his head and gave the order to begin. Meanwhile, Viscount McAlpine and his men were making the rounds of the mansion. He was discussing with his associate Danny the actions of Viscount Lanford. Viscount McAlpine explained why they had to be off the front lines. There were fewer of them, and Lanford had more authority. Even the property owner's soldiers couldn't get inside by standing outside. Therefore, Lanford only went in there with his men. While they were talking, a human auction was going on inside the mansion. Although they did not yet have proof that the mansion's owner, Earl Greenmore, was connected to human trafficking. Viscount McAlpine didn't believe he was involved in the slave trade. After all, that count had even helped them with one mission. McAlpine and his men were looking for the part of the building that contained the main stage on the third floor. Sounds came from the window, something flew out of it. "How dare you?" a stranger in a business suit shouted. It was the very scene the Vicomte was looking for. The stranger ordered to catch the blue-haired guy running away from there. Of course it was Heian. She didn't even realize they were drugged with sleeping pills. Two men tried to catch up with her. But Heian kept running away. She wasn't going to listen to what they were telling her. She didn't want to wait to be made a slave. Heian headed towards the window. From the window she saw the lake. Heian was about to jump. Those two were getting closer and closer. They don't plan on letting her escape. Heian directed a stream of air into their faces, thus distracting them. She climbed onto the windowsill. Heian jumped down from the third floor. She was lucky that the lower spirits were everywhere and helped her with air magic. The spirits slowed their fall and Heian landed softly on the grass. Looking around, she realized that no one was following her. Heian swiftly rushed towards the lake. As she approached, she was surprised. Heian saw a steep and high cliff in front of her. However, the girl was determined. She grabs the fence. Climbing this little wooden fence and about to jump. But someone grabbed her sharply by the waist. Turning around, she tried to understand. How had those two gotten so close to her? The man dragged her away from the cliff and put her on a horse. Heian thought that one of the kidnappers had caught up with her on horseback. She had delayed for nothing. Now she would have to call Sylph. But the man gently took her hand and told her it was all right. The man continued to reassure her, telling her that he was here to help her. Heian looked at him without taking her eyes off him and opened her mouth. He was a handsome guy with dark hair and green eyes. He was fully dressed in armor with an eagle crest on his chest. The guy was about to ask what her name was, but suddenly he heard his own name from the side. This young Viscount's name was Joel. Heian continued to look at him with confusion. Danny, Joel's subordinate, came riding toward them. He wanted to know who was with his master. Joel was just about to find out. Danny, without waiting, began to interrogate the girl himself. Who was she, where was she from, what about her parents, and why was she here? It was the red-haired young warrior who acted like an interrogation. Heian couldn't tell them the whole truth. She had to lie intelligently. Joel stopped Danny, telling her not to question her. By the way, unlike their father, the two of them addressed Heian in the feminine gender. Heian let out a tear, saying that she has no mother. Her mother died during childbirth, and her father blamed everything on his daughter. She couldn't stand his accusations and so she ran away. She couldn't go home. The guys felt sorry for the girl. Danny apologized. But Heian said it was okay. Her lie worked, even though it wasn't really a lie. Joel, after listening to Heian's story, suggested that she go with them. Danny said it is a great idea and a certain Mr. Harold would love it. This gentleman was very interested in hiring a new maid. Heian was a little confused. She started waving her arms around, trying to say she didn't need it. But Joel held her close to him and said it was okay. They would only be happy if Heian accepted their offer, and besides, she needed to make some money. This was clearly not what she'd envisioned. It seemed that while the three of them were chatting, the soldiers had finished their operation. Joel gave the command to leave. Heian, meanwhile, just wanted to be let go. Joel started talking about Heian's new job again. He warned her that she had to work hard because it wasn't as easy as it looked. She needed the money and decided to take it, trusting strangers again. Heian bowed and thanked her for being kind to her. She promised to do her best. Heian accepted their offer after all, at least until she saved up some money. A little more time passed. Heian was at the location of her new job. She was learning how to be a servant. She seemed to be good at it. Her teacher asked her questions and she answered them confidently. Who the servants were, what their duties were. She answered each of the questions. Heian stood in front of her new mentor. She was surrounded by a huge hall, with large windows and long red curtains. Every inch of this room spoke of the wealth and status of its owner. Behind the mentor's back were bookshelves and a fireplace over which hung a large portrait. The mentor said that a servant should always remind himself to be useful and valuable to his master. Heian didn't think she would have to study again. The mentor asked if he understood everything. Yes, she was mistaken for a guy again. Yes, sir. A little dejectedly, Heian replied. Louder! Shouted the counselor. Yes, sir. The girl answered dutifully. He was satisfied and sent her off to fulfill her duties. Yes, sir. Heian headed to Joel's room. She knocked on the door, asking if he was ready. Joel opened the door. Did you sleep well? Heian asked. Smiling, he answered positively, asking her the same question. Together they walked down the beautiful light-colored hallway. Joel heard Heian washing dishes till night, calling the herald cruel. But Heian didn't complain, she had to keep studying and working hard. That's exactly how she responded to Joel. Upon reaching the place, Joel told her not to clean his room, but to take a break from work. Heian appreciated such a gesture, a little embarrassed and pleased. She thought Sir Joel was an angel. Heian bowed and wished Joel a good day. Sir Joel headed off somewhere, along with the lady in the red dress. Heian had been working in this manner for quite some time, but she couldn't get used to it. She thought it was better to knock those guys out and get off the ship after all. Good ideas often caught up with Heian, but she was faster, She decides to just go back to work. She wanted to give it her best, since it was the first time she was earning money on her own. Heian's workday consisted of 6 items, a lecture by Harold on servant behavior, seeing Sir Joel off in the morning and greeting him in the evening, meals and lessons in table etiquette, cleaning Joel's room, laundry and similar chores, another lecture by Mr. Harold. She was just about done with cleaning the room, though Sir Joel had given her permission not to. She saw some familiar maids, and they struck up a conversation. The girls handed Heian the master's clothes, she must take them to Joel's room. One of the maids asked how she was training with the herald, the head of the maids wondering if Heian would be sent to the kitchen today. Heian modestly replied that she had been doing well for the past couple of days. While the three of them were talking quietly, someone overheard them and was clearly unhappy about something. This young man, in a yellow vest, interfered with the girls' conversation. He didn't like Nancy, one of the maids, gossiping in the middle of the hallway. Though it was more like an excuse to get rid of them. Disgruntled, the maids interrupted their conversation with Heian and left. At this time, the guy took Heian by the shoulder, saying that they needed to talk. "She's a little confused. How can I help you?" Heian asked. The guy told her to shut up and follow him. Heian didn't understand anything. Barely had they made it outside before this guy punched Heian in the stomach, telling her of a personal grudge from the day he showed up at the house. Now he was punching her in the face. He didn't like Heian serving the master. Another punch to the stomach, also flirting with his Nancy. The hitting stopped. Heian didn't understand what he was telling her or what he was hitting her for. But the kid didn't believe her. He decides that Heian is going to hit him. Two more crept up to Heian from behind, grabbing her arms. They were going to teach her a lesson. Heian gathered her strength. She kicks one in the leg, elbows the other in the chest and breaks free of their grip. Realizing the difference in strength, Heian runs away, trying to find water. But the guy in the yellow vest manages to trip her and Heian falls. Three bullies approached her. They wanted to beat up Heian for trying to run away. That redhead in the yellow vest wasn't going to let her go, but suddenly they heard a voice. Everyone was shocked, especially those three. Fear was evident on their faces. "Would someone please explain to me what's going on here?" Joel asked angrily. Heian looked at him, in thought, not understanding why Joel had come home so early. She could not continue the fight when Mr. Joel stood in front of her. One of the hooligans tried to answer his question. They were stupid and trivial excuses. They were all just having fun and playing together. Joel asked Heian if that was the case. He seemed to understand it perfectly well already. The three of them froze in anticipation. If Heian told Sir Joel the truth, they would not escape punishment. Not only did they beat up Heian, but they also tried to deceive their master. The expression on Joel's face at this moment reminded Heian of someone. Of course it reminded her of her father. Why did she always compare everyone to him? Heian was distracted by Joel's question and he asked again. "They were bullying me, so I was going to teach them a lesson, but you interrupted me." That was the thought in her head. But she couldn't say that and decided to confirm the words of her abusers. Joel handed his horse to the three men, ordering them not to put it away in the stall, for he would soon be leaving again. They obeyed and bowed afterward. Heian rose to her feet and followed Sir Joel. They entered the house, and the servants were confused. Their master shouldn't have been back so early, and he wasn't in the mood. One of the maids asked Heian what had happened. Although it was all about her, she only replied that she didn't know. Joel walked past the servants without saying hello to anyone. This confused Heian. It was the first time she had ever seen him so angry, and she thought of telling him the truth. She was very embarrassed in front of Joel. Heian was sure that Joel was angry about what had happened to her. They both entered Joel's room. Heian watched him with interest. Joel was looking for something on his desk. She wanted to offer him her help, but she felt uncomfortable since Joel had never asked her. Heian couldn't bear that silence. She didn't know what to do. Joel is usually always smiling. He is a very kind person. The average Joel is always polite and nice to his subordinates. He dressed himself, not accepting help from Heian, no matter how much she insisted. Servants do everything for nobles, but Joel was not like that. Because of that, Heian's job was easier. If it wasn't for Joel, Heian would have escaped long ago. But Heian always tried to help him with his appearance. She scrutinized Joel from head to toe. And every time, thanks to Heian, Joel looked his best. He was grateful to her for such help. But today was different. Heian wanted him to yell at her, just to interrupt this silence. Joel found some sort of brown box and placed it on the table. He told Heian to sit down, pulling some sort of mixture out of a box. She wanted to sit on the chair across from Joel, but he told there was a seat next to him. Heian hadn't expected that. The girl walked over and sat down on the couch, a little embarrassed. Heian didn't understand why he asked to sit next to him. Joel began to apply the mixture to the cloth. The stench of the medicine was just awful. "Your eyes are swollen shut, but you still want to protect those bastards?" Joel asked. Warned that her face would be bruised, he began to rub the ointment into her face. Heian was a little surprised, for even her old man had never injured her. She didn't know that she could hurt herself. Even with her spiritual power, she should be careful. And what would people say tomorrow when they saw her? It seemed to her that the herald would be furious at her carelessness. Still, she was sure she'd be fine. Joel finished and asked where her other injuries were. After all, she had clearly been hit in more than just the face, but Heian didn't want to show it. She said she was fine. But Joel didn't hold back and called her an idiot who didn't care after the beating. Those words pierced the impressionable Heian. Joel put a hand on her shoulder, asking where she'd been hit, but Heian brushed it away. She jumped up from the couch, saying that if it hadn't been for Joel, she would have straightened those three out. She'd only let them hit her once. "Heh, sure." Joel chuckled a little at her. Heian's attitude cheered him up. Joel hardly took Heian's words seriously. She was angered by Joel's behavior. Heian vehemently asserted that she would have had no problem massacring the three brigands. Actually, Joel saved them, not her. That's what she told him. Joel, chuckling softly, said he was sorry for ruining Heian's plan. He kept insisting that Heian let him look at the other injuries. The girl tried to change the subject, asking why he was at home, since he was supposed to be at the royal castle. The attempt failed. Joel kept asking about her condition. "What are you trying to hide? Did you get your ass kicked?" Joel asked. Heian insisted that everything was fine. Trying to hide her injuries from him made his curiosity even stronger. Joel grabbed Heian's pants and tried to pull them down. Heian ran back. She was starting to panic. That rugged face of Joel's could not be described in words. And yes, he thought Heian was a man for some reason. Joel walked over to Heian, pushing her against the wall a little. He didn't understand what she was embarrassed about. Heian was blushing like a tomato, embarrassed. She let it go to her own head that everyone thought she was a man. But she was a girl. Joel, smiling, sighed when he saw Heian's reaction. He patted Heian on the shoulder, promising that he wouldn't hurt her. He laughed at the same time. Heian was infuriated by his laughter. She turned around and started to walk away. If there were no directions, she had no business being there. But Joel stopped her and reassured her. He just asked to show the injuries to see how bad it was. Heian listened to him and lifted her clothes a little. There was a large bruise on her left side, but she kept saying it was fine. Joel was not satisfied with that. It didn't look good at all. Joel was glad he insisted and started rubbing ointment into her side. Finished, he invited Heian to join his training. She was surprised, not knowing what he was talking about. Joel was not going to allow his servant to be beaten. Heian tried to refuse. She really wanted to show him her abilities, but she couldn't. Training would begin the next morning. Joel promised to make arrangements with the coach for her. In her thoughts, Heian screamed, "Why should she get this?